Hi everyone, been away for a while, but I'm back now. Today we're going to be reviewing Bridal Mask. Bridal Mask is a 28 episode South Korean action drama. It's available through Drama Fever and Viki if you have Roku. Alright, the show stars Ju Won as Lee Kang-To, Jin Se-yoon as Mokdon, Park Ki-woong as Shunji. Okay, the summary of the show is basically in 1930s Japan, Korea. They're being occupied by Japan and they're being oppressed, and a hero arises from the Korean people called Bridal Mask, and he's basically you could say he's a Korean version of Zorro. This TV show is actually based off of a Korean manga of the same name, Bridal Mask. Okay, so let's talk about the story really quick. Overall, I'm going to give this show an 8 out of 10. Okay, I'm going to talk about some of the things I liked about the show and some things I did not like about the show. I'm going to go over this really quick. Some things I really liked about the show. I really loved the story arc of the main character in the show, Lee Kang-To. His story and how he becomes Bridal Mask, I feel, is one of the most convincing portrayals of a bad guy becoming a good guy. Sometimes when you watch shows and they show a bad guy and he becomes a good guy, it could be unconvincing, like it's not believable. But in this show, they did a good job of showing how this guy who is selfish and arrogant ends up becoming a humble and good hero, and I really like that about the show. Another thing I like about the show is the relationship between Lee Kang-To and his older brother. I love that storyline and how they portrayed it. It was so believable. It was compelling. It was emotional. It was a really good story or plot in the story. One of the things I liked about the show was also the storyline between Lee Kang-To and Mokdon and how they become a couple. It was a really believable storyline, and I really enjoyed that storyline, and it was believable and it was likable. It was a beautiful romance between the two. I also liked how, spoiler alert, I'm going to give you some spoilers about the story, but there's two bridal masks actually in the story and in the show. Okay, and I'm not going to go into who the identity of the first bridal mask is if you haven't seen the show. But I will say this: when they reveal who the second or the first bridal mask is, it is a very awesome scene. It is a very good scene. I really like that scene, and the reveal is really emotionally compelling. It was powerful. I like the way they portrayed the culture of living under Imperial Japan as a Korean at that time. Another thing I really enjoyed about the show was the fight scenes. The fight scenes were really amazing. Great choreography. They used a lot of the editing technique called vamp and revamp. So the character would be fighting in regular, speed, but then they would slow it down in slow motion. So I really liked that they did that. It was a cool thing that they added to the show. So there was a lot of good fight scenes, a choreography, a lot of great action scenes. Also, I like the music of the show. The music of the show, they combined opera music with pop music, and it was done in a way that was very compelling. I like the cinematography in the show. It was on point. I liked the costumes and the hairstyles, although for some characters I felt like the costumes and the hairstyles didn't seem accurate. But as a person who doesn't know anything about 1930s Korea, I might be wrong in my assessment. At first, when I saw Bridal Mask's mask and outfit, I thought it was a little bit cheesy, but as I watched the show, it actually grew on me. So I'm going to say, the clothing and the Bridal Mask outfit and his apparel was pretty cool, and so was his mask. Let's talk about the acting. Most of the people acting in the show, I'm going to give a 9 out of 10. The acting was really good, especially the character, Ju Won, who plays Lee Kang-To. He was very convincing as a villain and as a hero. Also, the guy who played his older brother, I don't remember his name at the moment, but he was very convincing as someone who was mentally ill and insane. Sunji, who was the friend of Lee Kang-To in the story, he was also someone who played his role really well. So I really liked his the way he played his role. He inhabited it really well. Okay, let's go into some of my problems with the show. Really quick, there was way too much crying in the show. You know, the show was 28 episodes, and I don't think one episode went by when someone didn't cry. Way, way, way too much crying. Okay, uh, it became to the point where it became almost a little bit ridiculous. Now, don't get me wrong. There were times in the show where the crying was appropriate and it was okay, but most of the, I'm going to say maybe 60% of the time, the crying was not necessary. It was just a little too much. Another thing I had a problem with the show was there was way too much talking and sitting around tables and having meetings. Like 50 to 60% of the show was people sitting down and talking and having meetings. That it happened way too much. Another problem I had with the show was the character of Shunji. The way that they wrote his character, he has a story arc similar to Lee Kang-To's, but the problem was his story arc was not believable. He's a good guy who becomes a bad guy, but it wasn't believable in my opinion. It was kind of like it wasn't believable to me. Now the actor did a good job doing the best he could, but the writing of how he became a bad guy wasn't believable. Another problem I had with the show was the character of Lee Kang-To keeps putting himself in bad situations where his identity can be exposed, where people can find out that he's Bridal Mask. And he does this so much in the show where it becomes so like, it almost becomes like ridiculous. Like, why does he keep putting himself in a bad situation where people could figure out he's Bridal Mask? Another thing was, connected to that was there were so many times where he almost got caught because of making bad decisions. And it came to the point where any person who was living in 1930s Korea, if there was ever a real Bridal Mask, they would have never done some of the stuff that this Bridal Mask did. He would just keep putting himself in situations where people could find out who he really was, and he didn't need to do that many times in the show. Another thing about the show was I didn't realize it till I finished the show was the character of Lee Kang-To and Shunji, who are actually friends in the beginning of the show. I realized that he was actually, throughout the show, he actually was a bad friend towards Shunji. I'm not going to spoil some of the things that happens, but he does some actually pretty bad things to his friend Shunji. The reasons he does those things are understandable, but still, it's not good. Yeah, so those are a couple things. Another thing I didn't like about the show was the show itself was way too long. Honestly, if you want to watch the show, what I recommend is watch the first 6 episodes and then watch episode probably 25 through 28, and then you'll be fine. But all the other episodes in between, like, they were kind of unnecessary. They weren't really needed. So I would recommend, if you're interested in the show, watch episode 1 through 6, and then fast forward through most of the other episodes, then watch episode 25 through 28. Another thing I had a problem with was I kind of wish they would have gave Bridal Mask 2 weapons, because all he had was an iron stick and a couple of knives that he has like in a satchel. It would have been good if they gave him 2 iron sticks to fight with, but that's just my own personal opinion, because you look at the show Daredevil and you look at Nightwing from DC Comics, they both have 2 sticks that they use to fight. So I wish they would have done that. Another thing is, at times I felt the show portrayed the Japanese in a way that was like so negative that it seemed a little bit one-dimensional. I'm not too informed about everything that happened in Korea as far as the occupation of Japan, but I kind of have a hard time thinking that all the Japanese at that time were exactly the same, that same exact way now at that time. Now I could be wrong. If there's anyone listening and you have a better understanding of Korean history and the Japanese occupation, I would appreciate your input. Another problem I had with the story was the storyline of the geisha. There's a geisha girl in this story, and she has a storyline that could have been really good, but the way they end the story, it left a bad taste in my mouth. I didn't like the way they ended that story. But having said all that, overall, I would give the show an 8 out of 10. It could have been better if the show was a shorter show. It should have been 16 episodes, 16 or 18 episodes at the most. It didn't need to be 28 episodes. Most South Korean TV shows that I watch, they're 16 episodes. So I felt like the show could have been better if it was shorter, but it is what it is. So yeah, that's my review of the show Bridal Mask. Don't forget, on Instagram, I have a picture that I drew of Bridal Mask if you want to check it out. Don't forget to like, click, and subscribe. Thank you.